Hello, it's been 9 years since I last appeared on camera on this channel, and my first two videos, which were done for a pitch fest. That book, by the way, has since been published. My real name is Anna, but I always preferred my middle name, Ursula. I'm an indie author. I have 12 books out currently, and I've had work in 6 anthologies. I'm also an artist, though not a professional artist. I work with colored pencils and pastels. And if you follow my main blog, carrieannbrownian.com at WordPress, I've been doing a lot of Dantean posts this year because this is his 700th yahrzeit, which the word means death anniversary in Yiddish and German. And I would like to speak about how I became a Dantephile and what he means to me, and a sneak preview of the recitation of Canto I of Inferno I'll be doing on his yahrzeit on September the 13th. I've made some notes about what I'm going to speak about, and believe it or not, some people still use cursive writing. So, my entire life, I've always preferred classic literature. I had hyperlexia when I was 3 years old, which means advanced full-blown reading at a very young age, and the first book I read, not all the way through at that age, was Grimm's Fairy Tales, and that was the adult, uncensored version that did do a lot for my subconscious and the things I like to read and write about. I like the dark side of humanity, and I know life isn't all rainbows and puppies and kittens. And I was that weird kid who liked almost all the required reading in English class instead of bashing books like Brave New World and Thing. They were so stupid and boring. I actually loved them and read them way ahead of what we were supposed to do, like finishing before the end of the unit. But after I graduated university in 2002, yes, I'm much older than I look, believe it or not, I decided to start reading some of the classics I had missed and never had to read for English classes or Russian classes. By the way, my degree is in history and Russian and Eastern European studies. I've been a Russophile since late 92, around the time I turned 13 years old. And I've always adored history my entire life. Most of my hobbies and interests are related to history, like silent film, classic cars, just, history in general. So I began reading all these classics I had missed in 2000 and 2003, like, for example, Catch-22, The Decameron, Song of Roland, F. Scott Fitzgerald, which, by the way, I think is kind of overrated. And I got to the Divine Comedy and started it in December 2003. But a little bit of background: when I began reading the Commedia, I couldn't walk. I was in a car accident on August 19th, 2003, when I was 23 years old. To make a long story short, I can talk about this in another vlog. I was run over by a car when I was crossing the road to start walking to work after I got off of my bus, and thank God I only had a severely shattered tibia and fibula, but I eventually required 4 leg surgeries and 3 plastic surgeries, and so my leg was in a splint at this time, and that book was already on my shelf in my room because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to access it because, I couldn't walk up and down the stairs. And it was the Lawrence Binion translation, which is in the Portable Dante, which was one of the books I took from my parents' collection. And at first it was hard to get into. It was written in Elizabethan language, and I understand his thought process. He wanted to make it sound like it wasn't modern, but that's also very difficult to read. It's one thing if, it's Shakespeare and that's the way the author originally wrote the story or whatever. But when it's a translation of a language that never had equivalent grammar or pronouns, that's extremely distracting for me to read. And so I basically put the book down for a couple of months in frustration, and I was also looking down at the footnotes constantly to see who all these historical and literary figures were, and that was very distracting for my reading. And so I think it was about March when I came back to it, and this time I just started concentrating on the actual story and the poetry, and mentally translated the Elizabethan English into modern standard English, and that made a whole lot of difference in my reading. But also I read very fast, in part to get away from having to mentally translate this, which was quite a big task for me. But I did, not without planning, to memorize the opening 12 lines and the closing 4 lines. And the deeper themes really moved me. But I did have a limited understanding. As aforementioned, I was reading very fast and also was not doing any outside study with books and things. And I'm not proud of the original review I wrote for my Angel Fire website when I was 24 years old. It's not that it's necessarily a bad review, it's just I focused on some of the wrong things. One of the things many people don't realize, cognitive development doesn't really finish until you're about 25 years old. So even if you're as old as like your early 20s, some of the things you might say or write or do come across more like those of a teenager, because one of the last things to finish developing in the brain is the ability to understand nuance and to contain your emotional reactions to things. And that came across in my review. For example, I was kind of ranting a little bit because it wasn't exactly like 21st century morality, even though I understood it was advanced for its time and a product of the Middle Ages. And there are a couple of, 2 in particular, I can think of anti-Semitic things in Paradiso, but I made a huge mountain out of this little molehill, and instead of just, realizing that's very legitimately problematic and just moving on to everything else that's in there that's not anti-Semitic or dated. And you can read on my blog, it's linked to on my Dantean post page, which I'll leave a link to below. And it did nevertheless inspire me to want to learn more and want a better translation. And I also put references in my books, most notably one of my books, Little Ragdoll, a Bildungsroman. It's mentioned, Dante and the Commedia are mentioned multiple times throughout the book as the characters, particularly the main character Adisha, they compare themselves to, the descent to the lowest, saddest point, and then gradually going up to higher and happier places. And I have one book called Journey Through a Dark Forest, Lyuba and Ivan in the Age of Anxiety, which is the 3rd book in my family saga about characters who were originally from Russia. And it was so long, even after I did some editing, that I had to put it out in 4 volumes, which is super long even for me because I deliberately write doorstoppers. And the titles of the 4 volumes take their names from the Lawrence Binion translation of the first. Midway life's journey, the right path appears not anywhere. This wood so harsh, dismal, and wild, and the good it is they're hap to find. And I also decided to someday write an alternative history where Dante marries Beatrice, because I really wanted him to have a happy ending, but I also wanted him to still write his magnum opus, and I had to figure out a way for that to happen. And it took me 17 years until I finally figured out more than a general concept of what to do and how he would actually still write his poem if he never lost his dream woman. And I began writing it in June. And of all my favorite writers, Dante is the only one who's always felt like a dear personal friend instead of just someone I admire a lot or would like to hang out with and pick the brain of. And also recently, the midway point of the Commedia inspired me to make Aliyah, which means to move to Israel. And by the way, if you're an anti-Semite, I will delete your comment. I have 0 tolerance for you. And it was the midway point is line 75 of Purgatorio 16. Light has been given you for right or wrong. And then a few lines later, it's so if the world today has gone astray, the cause lies in you it is to be sought. And that really made me wake up and realize I need to stop making excuses and letting other people talk me out of this and just, do it already. And I have started the process of making Aliyah, and Baruch Hashem, God willing, I will be there by next summer. And I'm sorry, this is my first time speaking on video, so I am a bit nervous. I don't have a lot of practice doing speaking to a camera or by myself. And I'd like to leave you with a recitation, a preview of the recitation I will be doing on September the 13th, Dante's 700th yahrzeit. The first 12 lines are from the Lawrence Binion translation, and the next 9 lines are from the Durling Martinez translation with a few small tweaks of my own. Now, I've been about 4 months or so memorizing all 136 lines of Canto I of Inferno in the original medieval Italian. There were times I thought I couldn't really do it all, but I did, and thank God it finally happened. And I'm working on Canto II in Italian right now, so okay. Oh, and one of the reasons Dante also always felt like a friend, because he opens by saying in the middle of the journey of our life, not my life or life in general. So he makes you feel like you're along for the ride with him. And many times he breaks the fourth wall to directly address the reader instead of, just writing about himself or a fictional story and not involving people at all. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura che la dritta via era smarrita. Ahi quanto a dir qual era a cosa dura, esta selva selvaggio e aspra e forte, che nel pensiero rinnova la paura. Tante amara che poco e più morte, ma per trattar del ben che vi trovai, dirò di l'altra cose che vo scorte. Io non so ben ridir come ventrai, tant'era piendi sono a quel punto che la verace via abbandonai, ma poi che fui al piede di un colle giunto, là dove terminava quella valle, che m'aveva di paura il cor compunto. Guardai in alto e vedi le sue spalle, vestite già dei raggi del pianeta, che mena dritto al tree per ogni cave. Allora fu la paura un poco quieta, che nel lago del cor m'era dorata, la notte che passai con tanta pietà. Midway our life's journey, I became aware that I had strayed into a dark forest, and the right path appeared not anywhere. Ah, tongue cannot describe how it oppressed, this wood so harsh, dismal, and wild, that fear, at thought of it, strikes now into my breast. So bitter is it, death is scarce bitterer, but for the good it was my hap to find. I speak of the other things I saw there. I cannot remember well in my mind how I came thither, so was I immersed in sleep when the true way I left behind. But when I had came to the foot of a hill, where terminated that valley that had pierced my heart with such fear, I looked on high and saw its shoulder, closed already in the rays of the planet that leads us straight on every path. Then was the fear a little quieted, that in the lake of my heart had endured through the night I passed with such anguish.